Good afternoon, everyone. This is Richard Harrison, Executive Director of ORSANCO, and with me today is Jason Heath, our Technical Programs Manager, and this will be the beginning of our webinar to talk about the 2018 Pollution Control Standards update. What I wanted to do, I'll be covering just a broad overview of what we're going to be discussing today, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Heath to talk about the details of the webinar participation time frame for the notice period and how we're going to handle questions today. I did want to advise everyone that this will be recorded. We'll be putting this on our website probably in the next week or so as we get the recording back to ORSANCO. So I'm going to start off by talking about really why we're here today. We're going to be really starting a public review, which actually began on January 10th of ORSANCO's Pollution Control Standards. Through this process, we're going to be soliciting input from the public on 5 alternatives that are being considered by the Commission for future implementation of the Commission's Pollution Control Standards program. As I mentioned, we have 5 alternatives that have been developed and considered by an ad hoc committee. A preferred alternative, that is, it's been preferred by a majority of the commissioners. And we also have a minority report that has been provided that offers some other thoughts going forward. Wanted to talk a little bit about who is ORSANCO. ORSANCO was formed in 1948 through the signing of a compact of governors of 8 states and was approved, ratified by the U.S. Congress. Our current members are Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia. We have 3 commissioners from each of the states and 3 federal commissioners that make up our board of directors. These are the decision makers, the policy makers for the Commission. ORSANCO's compact that was ratified through the 1948 signature process provides ORSANCO's mission and authorities. And our broad mission is the control of interstate water pollution. We do that really through making sure the designated uses are maintained for the bodies of water within the compact district, the Ohio River Basin. Just talk very, very briefly about ORSANCO's program areas. The current program that we're looking at is ORSANCO's regulatory program, which involves the establishment and implementation of Ohio River Pollution Control Standards. We also have a program involved with water quality monitoring and assessment. We have a broad source water protection program that includes spill detection and response, as well as HABs monitoring and response, nutrients monitoring, if you will. We also have Clean Water Act and Water Act coordination and implementation programs. We conduct applied research. Examples are work with emerging contaminants, pharmaceuticals, mercury. And then we have significant public involvement programs that include volunteer monitoring, our River Sweep program, and our mobile aquarium outreach program. So I wanted to provide some broad background about the current review before I turn it over to Mr. Heath to really go into the details of this initial phase of our review. ORSANCO as an organization, as a commission, has periodically conducted more in-depth reviews of our role in water quality standards. One of those reviews occurred shortly after the Clean Water Act was implemented, Federal Clean Water Act in 1972. And then we've also had additional reviews in the mid-'80s. And again, these types of reviews help ensure that we are utilizing our limited resources in the most effective manner. Not only do we look at our pollution control standards program, but we really look at all of our programs periodically to make sure that we are utilizing our resources efficiently. Through this review, the Commission has seen potential merit by perhaps considering the elimination of a third layer of standards. This will be done while still protecting the Ohio River designated uses based upon rigorously developed scientific water quality standards at the state and federal level. When you look at the designated uses that are part of the Clean Water Act, they essentially mirror the designated uses outlined in ORSANCO's compact. So the current in-depth review that we're working with began with an appointment of a Commission ad hoc committee to look at ORSANCO's role in water quality standards implementation. This occurred on June 30th, 2015. ORSANCO, from time to time, appoints ad hoc committees that look at a specific item or fulfill a charge. So in this particular case, the ad hoc committee was put together to again, look at our broad role in water quality standards from a more holistic standpoint, as opposed to going in and looking at each individual standard as maybe has been part of past ORSANCO reviews. This has been a very lengthy and thorough discussion, evaluation by ORSANCO staff, commissioners, and ORSANCO's robust group of committees. As part of this thorough review, the ad hoc committee worked on 5 alternatives to be considered by the Commission. Mr. Heath will be going into more details on that, as well as the some of the other intricacies of the review. But really what I wanted to cover is how we've really gotten to this point to launch this year's update of our standards. We really sought to have early input from our advisory committees and our technical committee. Through the work of the ad hoc committee, the culmination of that was a presentation to our Commission and ultimately a referral by the Commission to ORSANCO's Pollution Control Standards Committee. So the ad hoc committee's work really culminated in a recommendation and referral to the Pollution Control Standards Committee, which is the committee that ORSANCO utilizes to manage and facilitate the 2018 PCS review process. We certainly recognize on behalf of the Commission that the review of our role in water quality standards is very complex. And this has been a very thoughtful process and will continue to be a very thoughtful and transparent process that provides for substantial opportunity for public comment. I really want to emphasize that we are in the initial stages of the current review process, and this simply begins the 2018 Pollution Control Standards review process. No decision has been made by the Commission yet, which is really the purpose of the launch of this review. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jason Heath to really talk about the details of the webinar, what we're trying to accomplish with the webinar in terms of communication, how comments can be submitted, and then we'll have time for comments after we complete our prepared remarks. Thank you. Jason?
Thank you, Richard. So to go over just a few of the basics of this webinar, again, it is being recorded. We will put it on our website after we get the recording back from the webinar company. I understand that takes a number of days, so it may be a week or so before we get that back from them and can put it on our website, but it will be there. We'll do this presentation that we're doing now, and then we'll take question and answer afterwards. Currently, all participants are muted. You can type a question. In the bottom left-hand corner, you should see a public chat and a box underneath that. You can type a question into there, and we will respond to those questions after the end of the presentation. I just want to clarify, the purpose of the webinar here is not to take formal comments from people. We want you to submit those to us in writing, and we'll talk about instructions for that by February 24th. So we will not be collecting formal comments from folks today. It's more to answer if you've got a question to try to understand something better. We'll answer those kind of questions. But please submit your comments in writing, either to our by email or regular mail by February 24th. So moving along, just as a little more background, ORSANCO currently has pollution control standards. The ones that are effective right now is the 2015 edition. Those standards, they include chapters on the protection of designated uses, Chapter 3 on water quality criteria, and Chapter 4 on mixing zone requirements, and then wastewater discharge requirements in another chapter. You can get those standards on our website if you want to take a look at them. So, in a nutshell, what is the Commission considering, and why have we opened up a public comment period? Basically, the Commission is considering ORSANCO's future role in pollution control standards. That is it basically, and I'll go into a little more detail. There are, as Richard had mentioned earlier, there are 5 alternatives that have been developed and under consideration by the ad hoc committee. The majority of commissioners currently have a preferred alternative, number 2, and I'll discuss that a little bit further on in the presentation as well. Now, that is not to say it's a unanimous preference. There is a minority position and a minority report explaining by a majority of commissioners why they're not in favor of the alternative number 2. All of these materials are also on our website. You can go to ORSANCO's website, www.orsanco.org, and then click on Programs, and then click on Pollution Control Standards, and you will immediately come to the page with all of this information. In addition to a detail of the 5 alternatives and expanded alternative number 2, the preferred alternative, there is a minority report. In addition, the ad hoc committee had earlier in the year asked ORSANCO's advisory committees and technical committee to comment on these 5 alternatives. They did so in writing, and a summary of those comments are also on the website. In addition to that, for illustrative purposes only, there are 2 mock-ups of the pollution control standards on the website also that are based on alternative number 2. And the reason there are 2, one is a marked up version, so you can see what's been deleted, what's been added, see everything that's changed. That's fairly lengthy, just the way that Microsoft Word does the markup version. But in addition to that, there is a clean version. Now, that is not to say that that's exactly what they will look like. If alternative number 2 is selected, ultimately, it may look like that, but there will be additional discussions about how exactly the standards would be revised based on any of these alternatives. Okay, so here really is, in a nutshell, the 5 alternatives. I am just providing a very brief summary here. If you have an interest, you should download the document, which has much more information from the website. But in a nutshell, alternative number 1 that was considered was to altogether eliminate ORSANCO's pollution control standards, and that would really result in deferring to Clean Water Act and the state's water quality standards. Alternative number 2 is currently the preferred alternative by a majority of commissioners, and there is an expanded section on this alternative, and that, in a nutshell, would result in eliminating Chapter 3, which includes all the water quality criteria. It would include eliminating Chapter 4 on mixing zones and eliminating much of Chapter 5 on wastewater discharge requirements. Alternative number 3 that was considered was to utilize U.S. EPA National Recommended Water Quality Criteria. U.S. EPA develops and updates these criteria on a regular basis. They are recommended criteria, so the states can have different criteria, as well as ORSANCO. But that would be to utilize that as a starting point, and then only deviate as appropriate. Alternative number 4 is really an alternative to expand ORSANCO's current standards program for the purposes of increasing harmonization between the states, and that would also be in terms of trying to increase uniformity in implementation of those standards through permitting and what have you between the states. And the 5th alternative that was considered would be to keep the standards as they currently are, but add some language in there that clarifies that the standards are not mandatory, but are basically a recommendation similar to the way EPA's national recommended criteria are. So those were the 5 alternatives that were developed and considered by the ad hoc committee. I've already pointed out that the alternative number 2 is the preferred alternative, and so there is much more detail on that alternative in the written materials on the website. But along with that is also the minority report, which provides a rationale for opposing this alternative number 2. So with that, I won't provide additional details on that in this presentation, but please, we encourage you to read the documents. So the advisory committee and technical committee comments. This slide just shows ORSANCO's advisory committees as well as ORSANCO's technical committee. These committees all provided written comments on those 5 alternatives, and that is in a summary document on the website as well. We won't go into details on those comments, but again, please, we encourage you to please read those comments. In addition to that, the mock-up of revised standards based on preferred alternative number 2, and we've discussed that a little bit already. So those 2 documents are available for you to review as well. although there is no of course there's been no decision made on whether any of these alternatives will be adopted or not, nor if they were to go with currently the preferred alternative, what exactly the standards would ultimately look like. But these are provided as for illustrative purposes of what they might look like under those circumstances. So discussing the current schedule for the public review, this review was announced on January 10th. The informational webinars, there's the one today, and then there's one next Wednesday as well at 6 p.m. so that folks that work during the day that aren't able to participate will be able to participate next Wednesday. Comments are due by the end of the day on February 24th. After that, we will summarize all the comments received and provide those to the Pollution Control Standards Committee. The Standards Committee will review them, and they will be submitted to the full Commission at their June 2018 meeting. And then at that June meeting, if the Commission decides to consider moving forward with any of these alternatives, there will be a second public comment period similar to this one, with the exception that we will also hold a formal hearing to discuss exactly what is being proposed at that time. And then should things progress, then there could be a final decision by the Commission at its October 2018 meeting. Just to give you an idea of what public notification concerning this review we did as ORSANCO staff, there were several thousand emails announcing this public comment period. We have an email distribution list of interested parties, so it went to those several thousand folks on that interested parties list, as well as the entire Commission family, advisory committees, technical committee, commissioners. In addition to that, a press release was issued to well over 100 media outlets throughout the basin with a press release and a public notice. And then, of course, we've established a dedicated web page as well as an mailbox to receive comments. So instructions for submitting comments, please do so in writing by mail or email to us by February 24th. We would prefer email, but it's not necessary, and that the email address is also on our website, but it's pcs@orsanco.org. Please do not attach anything to that email. Just include your comments in the body of the email for our email, ORSANCO's email security purposes. And if you would prefer to send comments in by mail, you can do so to ORSANCO at 5735 Kellogg Ave, Cincinnati, Ohio 45230. So any comments that we received today will not be a part of the official record. We would like you to submit those in writing. And there at the very bottom is the ORSANCO website, where you can get all of the resource materials and instructions for commenting.